Okay, let's go ahead and start talking through chapters 18 through 47 of Same Kind of Different as Me. We'll go over some of the key points and some important quotes. So one of the first questions you were supposed to answer is to talk about Deborah Hall. What inspires her life and what does she think of Denver more? So let's kind of go through that. As far as Deborah Hall and who is she, we know that she's a very forgiving woman. And she's extremely full of grace. We remember from chapters 1 through 17 that she was very, very forgiving of her husband in a really beautiful way when he had cheated on her. And then on page 175, she is kind of not doing well in her health, and so she even kind of gives her husband license that if she passes on that he can go and find someone new. And it's interesting because she says even her, and we know that even her is referring to the woman that he had already had an affair with. And so that is the level of her forgiveness, right? That she really just wants the best for her husband. She's not holding things against him. She's a really quite incredible woman. We also know that she's deeply inspired by her faith. Ron describes her on page 81 as saying that she's not fearful of much, right? The only things on earth she really feared were black ice, yellow jackets, and rattlesnakes. Not exactly your shrinking violet. She did have one other fear, though, missing the call of God, and she felt called to work at the mission. And I think that's a really cool thing for someone to say about you, right? That one of the biggest fears that you have in your life is to miss the call of God. And we as Christians, I think if there's anything to fear, it's that. So that's a really, really cool one, and it definitely demonstrates kind of what she was known for. And what she was known for was having an extremely profound faith that impacted her life. On page 143, she says when she's she received bad news from the doctor. The doctor gave her 1 year to live, and she says, let's forget about what he said about only living 1 year, and let's just trust God. Dr. Goldstein is just a doctor. We serve the living God who knows our number of days. I intend to fulfill each one of mine. So I think that that's really kind of impressive, and in a really difficult and seemingly hopeless situation, she still says, no, God's bigger than my hopeless situation. And so clearly her faith is a powerful force within her life. One thing I love about her is that she has a genuine love for others. She doesn't pretend. She's not doing it for recognition. She talks about the mission itself on page 83. She tells Ron, look, I pictured this place differently than it is now. A beautiful place where these people can know God loves them as much as he loves the people on the other side of that tunnel. So clearly, if she recognizes that God loves these people as much as anyone else, I think she does too. And I think that that comes from, like I said, her faith. Right? She recognizes that God loves and values humanity equally, and she actually really wants people to know that too. She wants everyone to feel that. And I just get a sense of kind of genuine love for others in her. Ron mentioned on page 87, of the hundreds we served on that first day, only a handful told us what people called them, and Deborah wrote down their names. And I think there's something really important about knowing people's names, knowing people's identity markers is really significant. Remembering someone's name can really show you or show them that you care, that you've taken time to think about them. And so I love that Deborah does that. She writes down the names. This was from Denver on page 92. Denver talks about how he was actually really annoyed by her because she would smile at me real big and ask me my name and how I was doing. She really wanted people to feel like they were important, and she didn't want them to kind of fall by the wayside or be ignored. So she genuinely reached out to people. And then I love this. She not only did her service on Tuesday nights feeding the homeless at the shelter, it says on page 95, she began to rack her brain about ways to bring a little joy into their lives. So again, she didn't just stop at what's the bare minimum I could do to make myself feel better, right? She starts thinking, what can I do to bring a little joy into their lives. Her first idea was beauty shop night, then she had movie night, then she had birthday night, and then of course she invited everybody to Caravan of Dreams, which was that concert, right? So again, she took everything a step further, and I think it's because she actually really cared about making these people happy, about bringing, like it says, a little joy into their lives. We also know Deborah Hall is a dreamer. She has a few kind of visions in her dreams. On page 83, she says, I had a dream about it, talking about the mission. I saw this place changed. It was beautiful with flowers and everything. And so I love that she was able to kind of picture a better mission, a place where kind of it was inviting and warm and welcome, and less kind of business-like and less kind of prison-like, right? On page 85, it talks about how she had a vision about Denver as well. It says, that night she dreamed about a wise man who changes the city. She says, I saw him. I saw his face. That's a really kind of specific dream to have, because then we find out that that man was Denver. And I just think it's really interesting that I think God blessed her with dreams and visions of the future, because I don't know if you noticed, but later when she was very, very sick and people were sending her flowers, she ends up sending them over to the mission. And so that first quote there where it says with flowers and everything, I thought, that was almost prophetic, right? And then she has kind of a prophetic vision of Denver as well, and it was very, very specific. So I feel like God kind of blessed her with prophetic dreams. One thing I love about Deborah is that she sees the absolute best in people, okay? On page 85, this is Ron describing her and the way that she viewed all the people at the mission. It says, but she felt there was so much more below that surface image. Dysfunction and that should say addiction, yes, but also gifts like love, faith, and wisdom that lay hidden like pearls, waiting only to be discovered, polished, and set. So when she saw these people who looked rough, who probably acted rough, and probably sounded rough, she didn't just see the rough part. Okay, it says she saw the gifts beneath the surface, right? On page 86, she even goes so far and says, like, hey, let's call them God's people. We don't have to call them homeless people. We don't have to call them whatever. Let's call them God's people. And I really like that. I thought it was really sweet. On page 89 in particular, she recognizes Denver amidst his kind of violent tantrum that he was throwing, right? Like he was cursing at people, he was throwing things, he was, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine how kind of scary that situation could have been. And Deborah doesn't just see Denver as this scary man. On page 89, she says, wait a minute, that's the man I saw in my dream. That's the one who changes the city, the wise man, that's him. And so again, she's able to look way beyond the surface level kind of scariness of Denver and see the potential for amazing things that he does go on to do and say to people. I love on page 92, Denver talks about what she continually told him. She would tell him, Denver, God has a calling on your life. You are not a mean man, and I don't ever want to hear you say that. And I can only imagine kind of what Denver felt. I mean, remember at the beginning of the book, it starts with a story of like, this is why I don't trust white women, or I don't like talk to white women. And now you've got this white woman who is pestering him and speaking life into him. And so you can imagine probably how confusing that was for Denver and why he was so hesitant to allow her to even talk to him that way, right? But I love that. She was speaking words of life to him. And so I really appreciate Deborah Hall. All right, so eventually Denver and Ron become close friends. What do the two see in one another? And what draws them together? Okay, so let's start with Denver. I think Denver initially sees that Ron isn't just a holiday volunteer, which is a little bit ironic because Ron really didn't want to be there. He was really more about pleasing his wife. But I think that his wife kind of forced him to be a presence that was more consistent, and I think that was really cool. But on page 87, this isn't coming from Denver. This is coming from the guy that they call Mister. And he says, he challenges Ron. He says, I don't know who you folks are, but you think you're doing us some kind of big favor. And then Ron's response to this was like, thank you for helping me to see, your point of view a little bit better. But Mr. pointed something out that's really important, right? That when you go in service of other people, you can't go in with like a holier than thou, I'm here to help you type of attitude. And so I think that that's probably a common perception of a homeless person saying, who do you think you are? Like, do you think you're that much better than me? And so so anyway, the Mr. challenged him with that. Um, but then Denver says on page 93, he recognized something. He said, but these folks was different, talking about Ron and Deborah. One reason was they didn't come just on holidays. Most people come at Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving and give you a little turkey and lukewarm gravy. Then they go home and gather around their own table and forget about you till the next time come around, where they start feeling a little guilty because they got so much to be thankful for. I think that's a good challenge for us as we consider like kind of our opportunities to serve, right? That when you do decide you're going to serve somewhere, consider it as an investment into somebody's life, right? And you don't invest in someone's life one time and then walk away patting yourself on the back like, I just gave an hour of my time. Or think about your service hours that you have to do for school. Like, what do you have to do, like 40 or something? I don't remember what it is, okay? Whatever that amount of hours is. Think about it not as, let me see if I can get that many hours, but hey, can I actually take time and invest in someone's life? And I think Denver recognized that Ron and Deborah in particular were not ready to just walk away. And I think that was important. Later, and this I think was after the Caravan of Dreams, the concert, Denver says this to Ron. He says, I want to apologize to you. You and your wife have been trying to be nice to me for some time now, and I have purposely avoided you. I'm sorry. And I think that he was avoiding Ron and he was avoiding Deborah partially because he has a distrust for white people, like we saw at the very, very beginning. But I think he has a distrust for really anyone, right? And so he kind of had closed himself off, and he slowly starts to realize, wait, I think these people might actually be genuine in their desire to help me. Now again, Ron maybe even wasn't, okay, but Deborah certainly was. And so I think he's starting to kind of see, oh, these people are all right. Maybe I can open myself up to him. On page 101, Denver says, I'd been watching Mr. and Mrs. Tuesday, and I knowed they was serious about helping folks. So kind of like we were saying about Deborah, that she is genuine in her love for others. That was something that Denver was able to recognize and kind of, I don't know, he wanted that. He wanted to be around that. I think Denver, too, I love this quote. He sees a friendship with Ron as mutually beneficial. On page 108, he says, the way I looked at it, a fair exchange ain't no robbery, and an even swap ain't no swindle. He was going to protect me in the country club, and I was going to protect him in the hood. Even swap, straight down the line. Okay, so I love that Denver does not accept help with nothing in return. He feels like he has to earn everything that comes to him, which is certainly very noble. But he sees like an opportunity for friendship with Ron that he can actually give something back to. So I like that, because as in a position of homelessness, a lot of times you have nothing to give back. And I think Denver goes, no, if we're going to do this, I'm going to be giving back as well. I'm going to be participating and contributing to this relationship. And he certainly does. Ron, I think, sees in Denver deep levels of wisdom, right? On page 112, he talks about how Denver continually says, look, I don't want your life. He says, or Ron says this about him, he remained absolutely convinced that his way of life was no worse than mine, only different. He would not want to trade places with me for even one day. And I think that there is some wisdom in not chasing after wealth and money. And then I love on page 113, Denver challenges Ron with the keys, right? He looks at Ron's keys and he says, hey, do you own something for each one of those keys? Like, does that key actually go to something that you own? And Ron was like, well, yeah, I guess so. And Denver's like, well, are you sure you own them, or does they own you? Meaning, like, how much of your pursuit of wealth has changed you into more of a puppet of wealth, right? And so I love that wisdom, and I think that Ron recognizes that wisdom too. Speaking of wisdom, there were some questions on the themes guide or the theme sheet. Ron is pretty clearly the character who has the most to learn, both from his wife Deborah and from his friend Denver. What are the sources of Denver and Deborah's wisdom? I think that it's clear, especially with Deborah, that her wisdom comes from the Bible and from a genuine desire to love people the way that God does. And then as you kind of go deeper into Denver's character as well, a lot of it actually comes from his faith also. That he is just a guy who stays in constant communication with God. He's a prayer warrior, right? Conversely, why do you think Ron is the character who has the most to learn? Probably because he's the one that is the most confident in what he's doing, right? He's the one that has, he has the higher distance to fall from, right? What about his lifestyle and ways of thinking need to be influenced by these two moral guides? I'll let you guys kind of think about that. What are the different ways one can gain wisdom? Again, something for you guys just to think about a little bit. Okay, another question that you were supposed to answer. What are the symbolic implications of the conversation about how white men and black men fish? What does that conversation say about each man? And what is the underlying message that Denver is trying to pass on to Ron? So that conversation about fishing, I love it. I think that Denver was trying to communicate that, hey, friendship is something that is for life. And it's something that should nourish your soul. And he was afraid that Ron simply wanted a friendship as kind of a phase and, I don't know, as part of his service or volunteerism, right? On page 107, Denver says, I heard that when white folks go fishing, they do something called catch and release. Which, by the way, very true, that does happen. When colored folks go fishing, we're really proud of what we catch, and we take it and show it off to everybody that'll look. Then we eat what we catch. We use it to sustain us. I love that part because it's like a friendship shouldn't just be like something that's easy to get rid of. Instead, it's something that you need. It's something that nourishes who you are, something that helps you grow. So it really bothers me that white folks would go to all that trouble to catch a fish, then when they done caught it, just throw it back in the water. So he has a problem with that catch and release thing, obviously because it relates to friendship. On page 107, if you was fishing for a friend you just gonna catch and release, then I ain't got no desire to be your friend. But if you was looking for a real friend, then I'll be one forever. And he also says that being a friend is a heavy commitment. So Denver clearly takes friendship very, very seriously. And it's very beautiful, right? This metaphor, right, for friendship, this fishing metaphor. And I think that was a moment for Ron too, Ron recognizing Denver's wisdom, but also Ron really thinking about, oh, this guy means it. Like, he's pretty serious when he's talking about friendship. This is something for the long haul. And I think that this is kind of a pivotal moment for Ron because he makes a decision. All right, yeah, I'm in this. Okay, I am going to be in this. So it's kind of a big moment for Ron. This was not one of the questions you were supposed to answer, but I just want to talk about Mr. Ballantyne and how a legacy of love can be a really powerful thing. If you remember Mr. Ballantyne, that is the white guy that Denver Moore cares for, and ultimately Denver helps kind of bring into church. On page 158, it talks about how they first met. It says Denver walked up to the man and offered to help get him into the mission. In return, the man cursed him and called him the N-word. Okay, if I were Denver at that point, I'd be like, cool, man, see you later, right? Like, we done, okay? Now, granted, I am white, and so I can't really relate at the same level, but I think most people would, right? Like, yeah, we're done, okay? If that guy didn't just get beat up right there, I'm pretty sure that relationship would have ended, right? But Denver didn't let that relationship end. On page 159, Ron describes that relationship. He says, hey, Denver served invisibly, loved without fanfare. I was shocked that it included nursing this man who had never said thank you and continued to call him the N-word. It's just fascinating to me that Denver, again, didn't even flinch really. He was like, no, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to take care of this man. And I have to admit, I have a hard time understanding why. Okay. Then Denver was doing things for this man that most people would not want to do. And then the man, Mr. Ballantyne, continually was calling him the N-word, and it was a really bad situation. Anyway, Ron describes it here, too, on page 160. For the first time, it struck me that when Denver said he'd be my friend for life, he meant it, for better or for worse. And that's clear because he was a friend even to Mr. Ballantyne. The hell of it was, Mr. Ballantyne never wanted a friend, especially a black one. But once Denver committed, he stuck. It reminded me of what Jesus told his disciples, greater love has no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. And Denver definitely demonstrates this kind of sacrificial love towards Mr. Ballantyne. And then Mr. Ballantyne calls him the N-word, and he tells him how much he hates Christians. And then Denver says, hey, look, I took a chance, and I told Mr. Ballantyne that I'd been taking care of him all that time because I knowed God loved him. First of all, wow, to even say that after being called awful names for so long. God's got a special place prepared for you if you just confess your sins and accept the love of Jesus. What a beautiful thing to say to someone. Again, he is now speaking life into another person, which reminds me of when Deborah spoke life into Denver. Okay? And what I find fascinating is that Deborah speaks life into Denver, and then Denver speaks life into Mr. Ballantyne. This becomes a legacy of speaking life into other people and of loving other people unconditionally. It says on page 163, well, Mr. Ballantyne stopped calling me the N-word that day, and it wasn't too long after that that I wheeled him through the doors at McKinney Bible Church. We sat together on the back row, and it was the first time Mr. Ballantyne had ever set foot inside a church. He was 85 years old. And when he walked out of that church, he said, that was nice. Okay. Again, I just love that there's kind of a progression. Someone demonstrated some love to Denver, and Denver then extended love to someone who totally didn't deserve it, right? And yet there was positive fruit coming from that there was a beautiful thing that came as a result of that. What is the religious message? Again, this is not something you had to answer, but it is one of the questions on the theme sheet. What is the religious message that Deborah Hall, Ron Hall, and Denver Moore have to share? I think it has to do with the power of God's love, the power of unconditional love. What does the book have to say about the power of God in one's life? Is this message unique to Christianity? And I'll let you guys kind of think that part through. Okay, and lastly, a relationship built on trust. I love, love, love this part. Denver and Ron had to build some trust with one another, and it was kind of an accident in the way that it happened, but it had to do with the drive to Colorado. Ron said, I tried to convince myself I knew what I was doing, but the plain facts were that Denver was heading out on a 2,000-mile round trip, navigating interstates, back roads, and mountain passes, the highest in Colorado, using a driver's license that had arrived in the mail only the week before. What was he thinking? Better yet, what was I thinking? The angel on my right shoulder whispered that it meant, thank you, Ron, for trusting me. The devil on my left cackled, no, it means adios, sucker. I think Ron took a huge chance here. He sent what was essentially a homeless man off in his very nice truck with all of his daughter's belongings. Could you imagine? I mean, there's a potential there that Denver could have just taken off with it. Or let's just say Denver, and we just assume that Denver is totally honorable and full of integrity, which he is. But let's just assume that for a second. He's using a driver's license that had arrived in the mail only a week before. And new drivers typically are a little nervous on the road, especially when you're going up a mountain, right? Having to navigate maps. Do you think Denver has really ever had much experience navigating maps? Probably not. And back roads and interstates, and oh my goodness, that was a lot of trust on Ron's part to give that away to Denver, to give that job to Denver. Even Denver was surprised by it. He says, I ain't no thief and I ain't no liar, but Mr. Ron didn't know that. It just didn't make no sense to me why he gonna trust me to take all his daughter's stuff way off yonder to Colorado. It just didn't make no sense. I knowed he was a smart man that maybe thinks he knows what he's doing, but being smart don't mean he'll ever see his truck again. that takes faith. So even Denver was like, why is he allowing me to do this? But Denver really was a man of integrity. He says on page 150, ain't nobody ever trusted me before with that much stuff, and wasn't no way in the world I was going to take a chance. So I love that Ron also gave him money to spend on sleeping in motels and for food and all that stuff. But he ends up coming back with pretty much the same amount of money, slightly less, but because he slept in the car, right? He didn't trust the car to be unattended. He protected Ron's daughter's things, literally with his own being, with his own self. And instead of eating like nice meals, which he could have, he was eating out of 7-Elevens, right? And so Denver really took that trust seriously. The trip turned out to be life-changing for both of us, for him having proved he was trustworthy, and for me having learned to trust. And so it was a really kind of a beautiful, powerful moment between Ron and Denver, in that, boy, that was a leap of faith, but boy, did it pay off. Okay, so I think that's all we're going to talk about for chapters 18 through 47. Thanks.